Hi, it's Catherine Crosby from Migraine Australia. As all of you know, we've been fighting for some time now, well over a year, nearly 2 years, to get the new CGRP migraine medications on PBS. The drug that I'm on, Aimavig, has no chance. The company called Novartis has backed out of the process. And I was chatting to Maya Carvalho, who's a Canadian migraine warrior, who has the opposite problem. She's on Angelity. She does very well on Angelity. And Lily is not pursuing a reimbursement in Canada. So I thought I'd have a chat to her. We'll have a chat about our systems and how stupid this whole thing is. Thank you for joining me, Maya.
My pleasure, Rafaela.
How are you going? How's your migraine today?
I'm at about a sort of a 5. My pain tends to creep up as the day goes on, and it's about 5 p.m. in Canada. So I'm sort of, halfway there.
And pain is your main problem, isn't it?
Correct. So for me, aura is not an issue. It's really about pain and some nausea, and then all these sort of photophobia, phonophobia kind of symptoms.
Cool. And you're on Angelity?
I am currently on Angelity, and I've been on Angelity since about August. And for me, it does not necessarily decrease my frequency. However, it greatly reduces the intensity. So it allows my other migraine medications to be more effective, and it just makes the intensity of my migraine attacks much more livable. I used to get 9-day intractable migraines that were not responsive to any medication. And they would be at an extremely high pain level where I'd be sort of in the fetal position for 9 days straight. And that would happen frequently. And the difference for me has been that this allows the migraines to break daily. So it may not seem like a huge difference to a lay person, but I'm sure you can understand just having a fresh migraine from day to day is different than an intractable migraine for 9 days. And that allows me actually to do the work that I'm doing, advocating for other patients and running the support group that I run and doing all the research and writing that I do for this community in Canada.
Yeah, I can completely relate. I mean, obviously my story is the same. Even though pain is not my number one problem, I certainly have been through months of continuous pain. And it does just wear you down when it never breaks. It never stops. For me, my biggest problems have always been things like the hemiplegia, the paralysis down one side. And if you see me kind of slipping like this, it's just because that side is weak, right? So in order to kind of sit up in a Zoom call like this, I can fake it in a Zoom call like this. I'm actually leaning on the desk, right? So I'm using the bones in my arm to kind of hold myself straight. The loss of consciousness is always, it's a much bigger, much scarier issue. That's a trip to hospital and possibly intubation. So pain is a thing. It's just in my scale of experience, it's down here, right? Everything else is up here and could possibly kill me. So it's kind of priorities. But the relentlessness of it, when you're dealing with chronic and intractable migraine and what we call status migrainosis, which is where the pain section of the migraine attack lasts for longer than 4 days, is just, it's so hard to deal with. So any relief you can get, and these drugs have been amazing for so many people, whether you have a near curative example like mine, or a massively good response like yours, it's absolutely worth giving them a shot, but getting a hold of them is not easy.
No.
So I will explain a little bit about the process here. In order to get them in the first place, you have to go to a neurologist, generally. We've now kind of reached the point where you can actually walk into a GP, but you have to be fairly informed on the process of how to actually get them, because they're not in a pharmacy. The pharmacy has to order them in, and to get the discounted prices, you need to either order through a website or have a brochure or a voucher that kind of gives you the discounted website price. Otherwise, you're paying kind of $850 a month, which is, it's tough for a lot of people. Most people can't do that. You know, paying kind of $250 a week to be well, you know, is equivalent to a lot of people's rent. It's just not doable. So the process of getting any kind of coverage or insurance here is a very complicated process. The PBS is what it's called, the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, and it's kind of lauded, and many Australians think it's infallible and it's wonderful, and it's how we ensure that, you know, nobody ever gets broke from being sick in Australia. And in reality, when you have to actually use the thing, it is far from perfect. It's a very complicated process. The drug company applies to this thing called PBAC, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, which is a committee of 16, mostly doctors. There's a couple of patient advocates, the pharmacist, a couple of GPs, but mostly they're specialists or, you know, epidemiologists or oncologists or whatever. And basically they look at the drug and they decide whether it's better or the same as other drugs that we already have. If it's the same as, and they've decided that these drugs are the same as Botox, okay, no, they're not. They've done that because then they can make them only get the same kind of money that they currently pay for Botox. And in fact, that's exactly what they did. So Nevada said, no deal. These drugs are better than Botox and we want to get paid more than Botox. So they walked away, right? This is why I can't get Aimavig. After applying 3 times, they walked away and said, no, we're not playing these games. These drugs are better than Botox. Lilly and Teva, so Lilly makes Angelity, Teva makes Angelity. Yes. They both stuck with the process, but when the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee said in their recommendations, so they got positive recommendations, right? The positive recommendation is a recommendation from this independent committee that tells the health minister, list this drug on the PBS. The health minister can't, by law, list the drug without that positive recommendation from PBAC. Where we've gotten into quicksand is that on top of that recommendation is a whole pile of advice, right? And part of that advice is don't spend any more taxpayers' money on migraine. Use the existing money for Botox, which isn't enough money. That's all right. You've got, it's not a Migraine Australia chat without a dog in there somewhere. You've got to have the recommendation from PBAC. Once the minister gets that, it's got a bunch of advice, and then the Department of Health negotiates with the drug company on the actual price and all of the restrictions. So the restrictions proposed at the moment, you have to have chronic migraine for at least 6 months. You have to have tried and failed 3 of the older drugs. So that's your propranolol, your amitriptyline, your Furamate, right?
The daily orals. Yeah.
You have to have tried and failed 3 of those, which basically means that you have to have had chronic migraine for about a year, because that's how long it takes to get on and off those. On top of however long you've been suffering to get to the point of chronic, which is just infuriating to me, because we know, right? The scientists know that if you manage migraine nice and early, when it's still very episodic, you can actually avoid ever getting to chronic. But never mind, we'll just breathe through that one. What they're trying to do is reduce the number of patients that can get it on the system. And then they said, okay, but you can only use the same bucket of money that's already allocated to Botox, so no new taxpayer money on migraine. And both drug companies went, nah, we can't do that. Because that means we'd be paying for about 9 doses in every 10, and we'd be losing money on every dose. And they said no, reasonably, understandably, but they put forward other offers, other ways it could be done, you know, other ways that the amount of money that the government might have to pay could be limited, etc. So they approved Angelity 21 months ago. They approved Jovi 12 months ago. In fact, it's 12 months ago this week. To be listed on the PBS, and then they've just stalled at the Department of Health, and the health minister won't do anything about it. They keep blaming the drug companies. The drug companies keep saying, we've done all of our bits, it's up to the health minister. And that's where we're stuck.
Yes.
So
it's not actually on listed. It's just stuck at that level. I see.
the only reason we can get it at all for a reasonable price is these voucher programs. So the voucher, you sign up basically to a program with either Teva or Lilly. They give you a voucher that you can get the drug for a much cheaper price. So instead of being kind of, $800 odd a month, depending on, how much the pharmacy marks up, Emgality is being offered for $263 a month, and Joe is being offered for $287. So it is a fairly significant discount, but that's basically reflective of what they've asked the government to pay. Right. So essentially they're giving it to us for the same price that we're going to give it the government, except that it's costing them money because they've got to pay the pharmacist distribution fee.
Right. They're absorbing that.
They're absorbing that. Yeah. So it's very complicated. And what most people don't understand is that you have to jump all three of these hoops. In fact, for these drugs, because they're likely to be over $20 million a year if the government wasn't, being stingy, they would have to go to cabinet as well. So get signed off by PBAC, get signed off by the health department, get signed off by the health minister. And then if it's over $20 million, there's step 4, which is it gets signed off with the full cabinet before it gets listed on the PBS. We don't have an option really for private health insurance. Most universal health insurer type countries have, no capacity for private health to step in where public health has failed. About the most we can get back, I think the most generous we've found is one of the private health insurers offers $100 back per script, up to about $300 or $400 a year, right? You're talking about $400 off an annual spend of close to, if you're paying full price, it'd be, 10 grand. Right. At the discounted price, it's about $4,000. So you're not kind of, it's not really making a dent there. And they're not allowed, by all kinds of law and stuff to really step in and kind of take over from our public health system. So that's all very complex, but that's what's going on here. I'm a super responder to Aimavig. Aimavig is gone. They're done. They've dismantled their Australian team. The only way they're coming back to the table to talk about going on the PBS in Australia is if the health minister does something, anything to, he can ask PBAC to, change their decision or review their decision. And he hasn't done that. So, but unless he blinks, they're not coming back. They're done. They've spent too much money on it.
And because Aimavig, as we know, works slightly differently than both Emgality and Angelity, have you had an opportunity to try those to see if you would respond to them personally?
I tried one shot of Emgality, so technically not the loading dose. And it didn't do a thing. Like at all. So I haven't really tried it because I should try it with the loading dose and do it properly. It was actually a little bit naughty. A friend had one left over and she's like, I don't want it. And I'm like, I'm gonna try. That, by the way, people in Australia, is illegal. Don't do that.
No, don't do that anywhere. It's illegal everywhere. It's illegal
but there is a bit of drug sharing going on. I don't know if you were experiencing the same, because people are finding, they had 2 or 3 months worth of something and it didn't work, that they are quietly giving it to other people that have had success on one of the others. What I would seriously recommend is don't try it off the books if you haven't been prescribed a CGRP by a doctor. Please don't do that. Because there are, particularly people with health conditions, there are issues that you need to talk through.
There are contraindications, so we have to be careful.
And bad reactions and all the like. And it will be hellish for the rest of the migraine community if, there's a whole lot of black label or, black market CGRPs going around and say if somebody dies, for example, everybody could lose their CGRPs. So please don't.
That is the problem we do not need. No, that
would be very bad. This is why you go through your doctors, and it does mean in most cases going to a neuro. We just kind of, I was a little bit naughty, but after 2 years of being on Aimavig and having such amazing results, it was kind of not a big risk to me. Anyway, tell me what's going on in Canada, because your system is a bit like New Zealand's and I struggle to figure it out.
Yes, our system is very complicated. So we are sort of lauded as being a socialized system, but we are really a hybrid. So we are partly socialized and we are partly private. Basically, in Canada, you can get doctor's visits are fully covered by the government, and hospital visits are fully covered by the government. However, medications are not covered at all for most people. And then it becomes very, very complicated. So each province in Canada has its own provincial health system, and there are variations in those systems from province to province. But what is similar is that nobody gets their medication paid for. Everybody has to pay for it in one way or another. And most people attempt to get private insurance. So if people are working, they get private insurance through work in exactly the same way one would get it in the United States. However, we know that in our community, many people are chronic, many people are unable to work. And so those people don't have access to private insurance. The other issue we have is that if you attempt to purchase private insurance on your own in Canada, like somebody like me might do, pre-existing conditions are considered. So you are unable to get private healthcare in Canada if you have a pre-existing condition. So there's no way to purchase private healthcare. However, you cannot get your medications covered publicly. So there's a huge portion of the population that falls through the cracks in this section. Then you have people who are lower income. Those people who are lower income are able to apply for certain types of provincial coverage for their medications if they're getting other provincial supports, income supports. Mm-hmm. Then you have people who are on provincial disability programs. So those would be government-sponsored disability programs. Those people are able to get medications that are covered by provincial programs. Then the question becomes, which medications are covered by provincial programs? And those provincial programs are called provincial formularies. So in some ways, it's actually quite similar to the process that you described. Every drug has to go through a national review to be approved by Health Canada to even be in Canada. But then after that, the drug company has to decide that they want their drug to be put onto provincial formularies. They have to make that decision for themselves. And as you've just described, the drug company has to decide whether or not that's profitable for them, whether or not that's a path they want to go down. Once they go down that path, they have to be reviewed by something in Canada called CADITH, which is a review board that takes patient input as well as input from various physicians. And they then, after a very long period of time, produce a report about whether or not they are going to recommend the drug to be put on the provincial formulary. And then they recommend it to the health ministers of each province that, yes, it is recommended that you put this drug on the provincial formulary. And they do so, as you described as well, with a number of criteria. So that criteria can be reasonable, or in the case of Aimavig, some of that criteria was unreasonable. So Aimavig was the first drug of its class to come to Canada. So it got here in 2018. It was the first of the anti-CGRPs, and they were the first ones to apply for this process. And they really went for it, and they were quite aggressive in Canada, which was great. Because of COVID, a whole bunch of things got stretched out and the process took much longer. So they started everything in 2018 and we're in 2021 now. It's still not approved. They got a positive recommendation from the board that was called CADITH. It then goes to something called PCPA, which is our version of the pharmacy board. So it's a nationalized pharmacist group that then negotiates the pricing of that medication. And that's where it's stuck right now. It's in negotiations with PCPA. And we don't know whether or not that will move forward. So in the first stage of the campaign that I tried to run, what we did personalized testimonial letters from people who were basically super responders to Aimavig in each province in Canada, had them send those letters to their health ministers, which are with a real sort of delta of change of this is what my life was like before Aimavig and this is what I'm able to do after. We did that. Then when it moved through, I had them send it to their health ministers again as a reminder, and to send them to their MLAs, which are their, and MPPs, which are their provincial representatives, their local provincial representatives. And then finally, right now, at this moment, what I've done is I have done some research and I have positioned the class of anti-CGRPs and migraine as a women's issue. So I've taken the research which shows that women's pain is taken less seriously, women's medical conditions are taken less seriously, etc. And I've positioned it as sort of a neglected women's issue in Canada. And
everywhere.
I've done, exactly. And yeah. I've done separate petitions for every province, because every province has its own minister of women's issue and its own minister of health. So I am now running petitions in each province to try to attack it from that angle. I mean, I'm basically trying to attack it from every angle humanly possible. But the idea is that if there is some way for us to get Aimavig pushed through, because it's first in class for us here, it will possibly set a precedent for the other drugs. So Angelity has applied, and Vyepti should be here sometime this year, and they will be applying. And I'm hoping that this will sort of open the doors a little bit. Angelity has decided, Eli Lilly rather, has decided that they're not going to participate in that process at all in Canada. And that's very disheartening in the same way it is for you with Aimavig, because then that means there's no chance. So for someone like me, that means that when their patient support program runs out, it will cost me roughly $9,000 a year to continue on that. Yeah. And that's not feasible. In Canada, because as I've just mentioned, I'm unable to purchase private health insurance, my other migraine medications cost me about $5,000 a year. So the $9,000 would be on top of $5,000, which would be $14,000 a year, which is just untenable. So, it's a huge problem here. And again, because we have this partly socialized, partly privatized system, it's very, very complicated. Many of the people who live with migraine who do have private insurance, many of those insurance companies have chosen to put in exclusions for anti-CGRPs. So a person might have full private insurance coverage, but that insurance company has said, except we will not cover Aimavig, Angelity, or HIV. So they're out of luck. So again,
the drugs that would actually make a difference, you can't have.
And allow your employee to continue to be a high-performing employee. You can have those drugs. So again, not only do we have to advocate for public coverage, but at some level, we've got to take this to another level and advocate with private insurers to get them to take note that the provincial formularies, God willing, have put Aimavig on, and that should set the tone for them including it on their private drug plans. Because if the provincial formularies have deemed it necessary for migraine patients, then, private companies should also deem it necessary. So we will have sort of two battles to fight. And that's really a huge issue that we are dealing with in Canada right now, because as you've just said, I run a support group for specifically chronic patients. Everyone in the group has 15 or more migraine days a month. Many of them have hemiplegic, vestibular, every type of migraine. And, it's really been fascinating to watch these patients, many of whom are refractory, have tried, in some cases 20 medications, in some cases 30, have lived with this for 15 years, 20 years. And they're able to get a substantial difference and boost to their quality of life by taking these anti-CGRPs. It doesn't actually have any connection to whether or not they responded to previous medications, right? Because it works in such a different way that their success or failure on previous medications is no indication of whether or not they're going to succeed or fail on this one. So the fact that this has come into people's lives, they've seen the improvement, and it's possibly going away is so distressing. And I can tell you that I get probably a message, an email, a private message, a post almost every single day of somebody being on the verge of suicide because of it.
Yeah,
almost every single day. I'm sure you experience the same.
I'm the same. In fact, I tweeted, I think it was only yesterday, that today's message of clear desperation, which was a lovely woman in Brisbane who is kind of like, what country do I have to move to so that I can get a Joby? Like, that's where she's at, right? I will move countries.
Yes.
I will break the law. I will do whatever I need to do to get these drugs.
Yes.
It was actually quite cheery because it didn't talk about killing themselves rather than going back to the dark. And it's really, I don't think people can understand what it's like. I was completely disabled, unable to do anything for 8 years. And then suddenly somebody switched a light on and gave me my life back. And this is what we talk about, and we're not underestimating it. Yeah, okay.
No.
Me, super responders is only the top kind of, few percent.
Yes.
But for about a third of people, they're getting a dramatic, life-changing kind of response. For a first generation of a new class of drugs, this is amazing. This is why this research got the Brain Prize just last week, right?
Yes, Dr. Goldsby, yes.
Yeah. Because people in medical science recognize how brilliant this is. Aimavig was Time Invention of the Year in 2017. So it's kind of, you have to kind of understand and appreciate for people that don't live with migraine. This is literally, this is like our pass, right? We kind of can live with our disease and function too. So it's so hard when you're dealing with government bodies that are complicating and confusing to deal with in the first place, and then they don't take migraine seriously, and therefore they don't want to pay for the drugs. I get that the patient numbers are scary, right? We're talking about 2.9 million Australians. We're talking about 400,000 with chronic migraine and another 100,000 with, the more severe debilitating types of migraine like hemiplegic and brainstem. And that's 500,000 people. Trying to figure out the numbers on 500,000 people is when you start talking about, well, there's nothing in that calculation that doesn't have an M on it. And it's, like, if you're going to be real, if you're talking about over the forwards, which is how we do our budgets here, the first, the 4 years ahead, then it's going to have a B on it. So it's kind of, I don't have a problem with that, right? Migraine is costing Australia $36 billion a year. I don't have a problem with spending 100 million a year, roughly, they estimate, on having a significant proportion of that come back into the economy. If they allowed episodic patients, particularly the high frequency episodic patients, right? So these are people with kind of 8 to 15 migraine days a month. They are just as bad, right? If you're losing 2 days a week to migraine, you need help. You need a preventative. adding those people in, you start to take the patient numbers up from like 400,000 to 1.5 million.
Right.
So it becomes really scary, and there's, absolutely everything you're talking about has a B on it.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that, right? I'm a taxpayer.
Right.
I have
Yes.
no problem with that money being spent, because it's
Right.
cheaper for the government to spend that money and for us to all go back to being happy taxpayers.
That's right.
Rather than being dependent on welfare. This is not,
That's right.
this is a no-brainer, right? We
Right.
are mostly young, working age women.
Right. I mean, we know that it's hitting people at their peak earning years, right? We know this.
Yeah.
So the choice between doing something that could potentially make people contribute to the GDP again or not does not seem, that difficult. As you say, the numbers might be not that palatable, but when you think about it as getting people back to work, really getting people back to work or getting people back to their family lives, basically just improving their functionality, it really shouldn't be this difficult. And for us in Canada, in any case, part of the problem is that there has sort of been almost no advocacy until very recently. Like, we didn't even really have migraine groups until a few years ago.
Yeah,
so there's versus the US, where they've had them for a while and they have multiple organizations hitting it from multiple angles, and it's a very different situation. In Canada, it's almost treated like a new disease. I mean, it's really quite right for one of the old, a disease that was described by Hippocrates. It's treated like it's something new that we're discussing, like, what is this? Oh, let us tell you about migraine. And, Serena Williams is going to tell you about it, but it's so old and it's just been ignored. And really that kind of dismissal, I think, is really at the root of it. It's just that it continues to be dismissed, and there continues to be this lack of understanding of thinking of it as a headache. And I think as well, part of the problem is that so much of it is hidden. So, I think part of the problem is that when we are suffering from an attack, if it's hemiplegic where it's so serious, or, a regular attack, which is so painful, in either of those situations, many times you're retreating from the world, right? That's the only way. You're not in public, you're retreating. And so nobody sees it, really. I mean, really nobody sees it. Most people in my life don't see me during that level of attack. They see me right after, or they see me right before, but they don't see me during it. And I think that, that's part of the buy-in that we need in these countries, is to understand, really believe and understand it's a neurological disease. Like, we are not joking around. This is a serious thing. This debilitates people. The World Health Organization has views on it. They recognize how disabling it is. So, why are our countries just kind of messing around and treating it like it's a headache?
Yeah. If the WHO says it's equivalent to quadriplegia in terms of how many, what they call life-adjusted years, how many years of your life you lose to a particular condition, can we please, accept the fact that we're not talking about a headache. We are talking about something where medication can manage it for a lot of people, but you need to give us that medication. Right. It's kind of chicken and egg. If you could get a job, this is where I'm at the moment with Aimavig, right? So I've stopped taking it. I stopped taking it in January, and I wrote about that on my blog a couple of days ago, because it was kind of time to tell people why I was being so cranky. So I stopped taking it in January, largely because I couldn't justify continuing to take money from my retired dad to pay for medication, to sit around the house. Now I don't sit around the house, right? But I finished my PhD. So, I'm just running a charity. Well, actually, I'm trying to pass that off at the moment as well, and looking for a job. If I can get a job, there's a shot in the fridge that I will take the second I get that email saying congratulations.
Right.
because if I can get a job, then I can pay for the medication, therefore I can afford the medication. The problem is that we're not going to be able to get people off welfare and back to work if they don't have the medication in the first place, right?
That's
it takes
right.
a couple of months to adjust to. It takes a couple of months
That's
for
right.
it to really start to work.
That's right.
So even a super responder like me, like mine kicked in on day 6, and it was
Oh,
really
wow.
like flipping the light switch.
Wow.
But it still took until about month 3, month 6 before I was at 0 migraine days, right? So I went from kind of, 30 to kind of 20, 15, and then 10, and then 0.
Wow.
Now that in migraine land is phenomenal, right?
Yes.
That's a brilliant response in
yes.
migraine.
Yes.
And that's, I think you have to, you can use that as a yardstick for how debilitating migraine is. To quote the wonderful Professor Crosby again, he said you used to have a choice that you could lose your body or lose your mind, and migraine was so incredibly bad that people go, oh yeah, I'll take that one. Like it was no hesitation of, putting on heaps of weight or losing your mind, kind of for, because of side effects of the drug. I mean, Topamax, which is probably the most common of the older drugs, is, it's got a patent side effects, patent half long. It's, very well known as being not a fun drug. Works for some people, doesn't for others, but it screws with everything.
No, I mean, just the fact that these aren't processed through your liver and kidneys is a win in itself. I mean, really, just that fact that that's not the mechanism. Many people who have migraine, as you know, have comorbidities. So they're dealing with multiple illnesses and they're taking medications for a number of things. So
have you experienced the same kind of reports that we're getting here of a lot of people with comorbidities, particularly things like POTS and fibromyalgia, where those other comorbidities are also getting better from being on the CGRPs? And IBS is the other one. IBS is kind of, it's a bit weird. Some people are getting worse, some people are getting better.
Yeah, I'm not getting that much as, I can't say I'm getting those reports of the comorbidities getting better, but in the case where somebody is, I mean, I suppose it depends on whether or not they're a super responder or not. So if they're a super responder, I find that yes, in some cases, some of the nervous system disorders also get better. If they're not a super responder and they're just having a very good positive response, then, I'm not noticing any difference with those other comorbidities. But in my view, once one thing starts taking hold and you start to feel a little bit better, there is a bit of a cascade effect. So, I'm not a perfect example because, as I said, my frequency is still very, very high. But, your response to other medications simply because of your overall threshold being lowered, your overall load being lowered, whether that be pain, whatever your symptoms are, makes everything else a little bit more responsive. I really believe that, so if you are not, for example, cycling so much in migraines daily, then it's a little bit easier when you get physiotherapy because your physiotherapy is not going to trigger you as much, right? That's a huge issue we have a lot, which is, for the high chronic people, so much body work is triggering, everything is triggering. So once that gets taken down and dampened a little bit, then other things can happen. You can then get body work. You can then possibly exercise a little bit more. Like a lot of other things can happen to improve your other comorbidities that you're talking about. So I do think, I haven't sort of delved into that much, but I do feel that overall it has a cascade effect where everything improves.
The first one
Yeah.
I noticed was the people that have been diagnosed with IBS, because of course the abdominal aspects of migraine are largely ignored, discounted, what have you. And IBS rather is kind of, you know, it's a bit of a catch-all diagnosis of, we're not really sure what's wrong with you, but it's not working.
Something's wrong with your gut. We don't know what it is.
You know, and what kind of really struck me, this is like even back in the early days, you know, when we only had Aimavig, was so many people talking about the constipation, right, which is the only side effect of Aimavig, and sometimes really severe. But there was a whole lot of people that kind of previously had IBS, and they're like, actually, my gut's fine now; it's happy. That was the first thing I noticed. And then, you know, I had a conversation with one of our really loyal volunteers actually the other day, and she's like, most of my fibromyalgia symptoms are just evaporating, and I'm like, okay. So and similarly,
and this was specifically with Aimavig?
I think that was Angelity. That was Angelity.
Okay.
So CGRP does other stuff. We know that. We know that it does something in the bowel. We're not really sure what. But clearly, you know, stopping that whole migraine storm, you know, there's obviously a whole lot of kick-ons and side effects of that storm, right?
Yes.
So we know that a migraine attack is, you know, it didn't come out of the blue, that there's a certain level of different functioning going on in the migraine brain all the time. And that we have different chemicals and loads that happen during, you know, what they call the migraine storm, which is that storm of chemicals and sensory kind of reactions that kind of creates the migraine attack. So that storm, I think if you can stop that storm, you're actually stopping all of these other things as well. And this is kind of where I kind of keep reminding myself, these are first generation CGRP drugs.
Yes.
Right? The pharma guys are already working on generation 2. They're already working on making it better. So it's not like this is all they're going to be and they're going to stop. No. There will be a second generation, probably a third generation, and they'll get it right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's happening is there's more research happening to now delineate what are these different types of migraine. So what are these people with migraine that aren't responding to the CGRP drugs? What's different there?
Right.
That research is so important.
Yes.
Because I think, you know, I think we'll get to a point where there are, even though we kind of discourage people using the word migraines to describe attacks, there are different types of migraines. Like there are different types of epilepsy, and you need a different treatment to treat that particular type of migraine. We're right on the precipice of understanding all of that, and the science getting all of that, which is again why it's so exciting, why we got the brain prize, you know.
I'm just I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah,
I feel exactly the same way. And in fact, when people talk to me about sort of adolescence and adolescent migraine, or if they have children who are who are starting to get migraines, I really feel, and I tell them honestly, I think it's going to be a completely different world for those teenagers. There's so much development going on right now. There's so much more understanding even now. The difference between now and 5 years ago is a huge difference. That, you know, I have a lot of hope that in 10 years there would be a chance of having enough medications and treatments in place that you would be able to prevent people from crossing over into that threshold of chronic. You know, you would be able to keep people at episodic with all the tools we sort of have available and all the things that well, of course, we'd have to have access to those medications, but, you know, if we did, I really do, because what I think is really important is that what they're discovering is, as with anything, what they're discovering is how little they knew, right? What they're figuring out is all the different proteins and all the different mechanisms that can affect this, and how they can block this, you know, electrochemical reaction at different stages, and all the mechanisms that we haven't explored yet. You know, I was listening to a speech by a doctor in the States, and he was talking about the fact that there are 11 new medications in the pipeline. 11. I mean, they're not going to come soon, but they're all exploring different pathways not, it's not, as you know, there's PACAB and all these different ones, but they're all exploring different ways to attack this disease. And so I feel like now that it's finally being taken seriously, if people are attacking it from different angles, if some people look at it, as you say, to try to figure out, using some kind of algorithm perhaps of what are the characteristics of this profile and this profile and this profile and who reacts better to what, you could solve this. I mean, you're not going to cure it. It's not curable, but you could manage it, and you could probably start, bringing people down into that episodic or high episodic range and prevent them from getting to this point where they're chronic and their central nervous system sensitivity and all these other things that start to feed into this loop. We could sort of break that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I'm kind of getting more and more passionate about is early intervention, right? So they've identified that colicky babies, and I was one of those. It's actually the earliest presentation of migraine. Okay, so let's do early intervention then, because we know that this is a spiraling condition. We know that each one of those big attacks does leave scarring on the brain if the inflammation is strong enough. So if you can stop as many attacks as possible, even right back when they're babies, then do it. Because you're essentially preventing, we now know, significant disability from migraine in middle age and dementia in later life. So, that's going to be, I think, for us as advocates, I think the next thing, while the drug companies and scientists do their thing, the next thing for us is going to be early intervention programs and how we can introduce those lifestyle adjustments really, really early on. Even if it's just, keeping things dark and quiet. And removing things like, preservatives and additives from food. And even finding out, what food is triggering people, if they have food triggers, all of those kinds of things. If you can introduce those to somebody who's 2, then by the time they're 10, they don't even think about it. It's just how they live their life, rather than trying to introduce it to somebody at 25 when they've already got, their entire life and habits and family and, all of these things they need to think about, and they have to learn something new when their brain isn't functioning properly. That's just really tough. And we get, when we do our awareness and stuff, the one thing that kind of I always notice is the pushback. I don't want to do that. It's going to be too hard. If you introduce it to babies, right, then you might get a bit of pushback from mum and dad, but mum and dad are usually more willing to do things to keep their child healthy than adults who still is kind of a bit resistant to the whole diagnosis. So
what do you get the most pushback on? Which facet?
Possibly the MOH, so the medication overuse headache management, right? Once people have gotten used to taking triptans every day or taking codeine every day, when you turn around and you say to them, look, can you only take those 10 days a month? They're like, no, I can't survive without it. And it's like, well, okay, but you're never going to get better. You're never going to get out of this MOH loop until you take the drug away. And that's just tough. Like it's really, really tough. And even, I was saying in one of our lives the other day that I've been freshly reminded going off Aimavig how tough it is to not just pop pills all day, every day. To have those days where you just suck it up and to remember to rotate. I have a triptan today, I have codeine tomorrow, I have aspirin on the days and I'm not so bad, or whatever that you do in order to kind of keep those actual drug classes all under 10 days. That's probably.
Are your regulations in Australia a little different from ours? Because ours in Canada are 2 to 3 days all in. Is that yours as well?
We follow the American Migraine Foundation's guidance. So we don't actually have a national guidance on it at all. The stuff that we've got on our website is based off both the Migraine Trust and AMF. But some of them do use that wording of 2 to 3 days a week as opposed to 10 days a month.
But no, sorry, I just meant regardless of the class, so a totaling of each class, right? So if you're taking, so in Canada, it's very strict with headache specialists. So whether it's an NSAID, a triptan, codeine, whatever it is, each of those classes have their own threshold individually of MOH, right?
Yeah.
So like triptans would be not more than 10, NSAID is 15, etc. Opioids would be 4 in Canada. However, the guidance by headache specialists in Canada is all together,
only 2 to 3.
doesn't matter what combination, all together, you cannot use acute medications more than 2 to 3 days a week. So
that's
it doesn't,
harsh.
yes.
Yeah,
So,
I don't think I want to be telling people that. I'd get so crucified.
So I just, just to sort of, those are, that's the Neurology Association, headache specialists, those are the guidelines in Canada, that it's 2 to 3 days total acute meds. And you can understand why, for someone who's having 28 days,
that's not reasonable.
That's not reasonable. And what tends to happen is that, this question has been, I don't know if this is appropriate to discuss in this conversation or not. So cut me off if it's
we
not
can always
okay.
edit it out, but I'm sure it'll be fine.
Okay. So this question, comes up at things like the Migraine World Summit or other international sort of things. This question will frequently come up from people who are chronic. They'll say, okay, that's fine. That gives me 10 to 12 days. And what am I doing for the other days of the month? What am I doing for the other, 17 to, 20 days of the month? And the response is, well, on those days, you should be doing things like yoga, meditation, a neuromodulation device, etc. And, I have to tell you that that's not an adequate answer for most members that I speak to every single day of my life. That's simply not enough. If you've got, if you've got an attack, if your attack is lasting all day, if you've got 28 days of those, 12 days is a challenge. And so, that's why, again, these anti-CGRPs are important, because, they might be, if they're not reducing the frequency, they might be reducing the intensity, or vice versa, or if you're very lucky, both. But, that's those are our restrictions here. So.
I mean, acute medications are great. They're great when you can take them, but at the end of the day, acute medications are not, not really, they're not preventative, but I wouldn't even say they're not really management. They're kind of band-aids.
Yes.
Yeah,
they are. Yes.
They're not really managing the condition. You have to do a lot of things. We're never going to say just give us the drugs and we won't do all of the lifestyle stuff. We know that we need to keep doing all the lifestyle stuff too.
Yes.
But we need the drugs. Like, we just need the drugs.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed.
And it shouldn't be this hard. And nobody who's sick should ever have to fight this hard. Not in my country, not in yours. I mean, the fact that you have to fight with all of the provincial governments as well, it's just kind of something, okay, our system's not too bad.
Yeah.
I feel the same because New Zealand's the same, right? They've got a national body and then they've got to appeal to all the different provinces. I don't get it. And then you kind of sit there and if you look around the world, other countries, Scotland kind of went, yep, tick, bang.
Yes.
And
they
UK
did.
Like the rest of the, Britain didn't. And it was kind of like, that was so weird to watch. But with the NHS in the UK, the patients actually have an appeal option. Which we don't. But
they are making headway, are they not, in the UK?
They're all listed in the UK now. It just took a bit of a fight. Israel is another country that has not mucked around. The prices there are relatively cheap, and their universal or their system of health insurance is quite unusual in the sense that they have universal healthcare, but it's done through 4 different private insurers. So you choose which one of those private insurers that you want, And if you're, say, unemployed or on welfare, the government pays for the bottom tier of that insurance option. And when I spoke to Israel Migraine and Headache, they said that it was costing them about 200 shekel, which is about $75 Australian. Canadians can look up how much that is, with each of the insurers. And they were fighting to get it on what's called the health basket, which is where the government subsidizes it down to literally pennies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So like it's I think it's now costing I think it's now costing them something like 6 shekel, which is like $2.
Oh
I know, right?
wow.
Like, I really should have moved to Israel. And in fact, I know people that have moved from Australia to Israel in order to get access, particularly to Ajovi, which is the one in the health basket, because of course Teva is an Israeli company. So, you know, like and we're not going to go into what's going on in the States, right? We know that insurers are playing hardball, that some of them have covered it and it's great, and they're paying copays of $5 or $25 or whatever their copay is, and then they're turning around and saying, actually, can you stop taking Angelity and try Ajovi, or can you stop taking Aimavig and try Angelity? Like, we are sorry for you guys. We wish that it was better, but perhaps this chat has emphasized that having a choice of private insurers is probably not a bad idea if those insurers will cover drugs. We don't have that option. Right. So there has to be a better way to do it. I think people do need to understand, in my country and in yours, that our universal healthcare systems are not that universal.
No. And many people are falling through the cracks.
Many people. And when we talk about migraine, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are not getting what people with other conditions get. And that's just, you know, where we're at. I'm sorry to be yet another angry woman screaming, but which is, you know, what Australia seems to be the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you've been following the news. I know that has been international news, you know, about the alleged rape in Parliament and the alleged rape by a cabinet minister. You know, Australia is a very, very large group of angry women at the moment. Sorry to pile onto that, but we are really furious.
Yes.
As I said, Ajovi was recommended to be listed on the PBS a year ago, and Angelity 21 months ago. It is entirely a political decision from this point to list or not. And we're stuck. And for some reason, you know, the world environment is that, you know, people with migraine don't matter.
That's right. It's not urgent enough. It's really not seen as urgent enough, right? That's the issue. It's not seen as an urgent enough or serious enough medical condition, disease to warrant this. So that's what needs to shift in the thinking. That's really what needs to shift. And as I said, in Canada, we're just on Aimavig. We aren't even close on Aimavig. Emgality's out of the picture. We don't know when Vyepti will come. So, you know, best case scenario, if Aimavig gets approved, that will be approved for people who qualify for public reimbursement, and that will be the only one for quite some time. So, you know, it's a tough haul, and people are having to make really, really difficult decisions that no one living in countries this wealthy should have to make.
Exactly. You know, Canada and Australia are incredibly wealthy countries. We can do this. We actually can. It's not a problem. And in fact, it will actually make more wealth for both of our countries.
That's right.
The reduction in the gender pay gap, when you don't have 45% of your women aged 25 to 45 backing off of their careers, in and of itself should be enough.
That's right.
We're just gonna have to keep fighting.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
But you have to be well enough to keep fighting, and I have to be well enough to keep fighting, and there's the challenge.
It is the challenge, yes.
Yeah.
I know.